Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Dream Big podcast. So glad you're jumping in again. And again, favorite thing to do is introduce you to people that have ambitions that are going after those. Some people that listen to the podcast, faith is a big deal, guides their steps. Others of you, not so much. But whatever got you here, I just hope that what you'll do is you'll not only hear what people have to say, but then to say, okay, so what do I do? And I want to take off the table agreeing. And I want to just say, if you take off the table agreeing with Jesus, the only thing that's left is to do something about it. And we'll each do it wonderfully in our own different ways. So welcome. I want to invite
Thank
the
you.
Hudson team.
Thank
Here,
you so
introduce
much.
yourself to the people that don't know you yet and tell us what you two have been up to around the world, literally.
Thank you so much for having us, Bob. This is such an honor. My name's
Likewise.
Hudson. This is my wife, Emily. We started dating in high school, and the past 8 years now, we have been trying to travel to every country in the world. So we're currently at 90% of the way done, and hopefully...
So 195 countries, so you have 19 and a half to go?
Yes, so we are
that includes
hopefully...
Liechtenstein?
Yes. Not as much to see in Liechtenstein, but
yes,
it's a beautiful country.
Gone in a second. It's like going across the street and now you're in the next country.
Exactly. So the whole reason why we started this was when I was in college. We both went to the same college, and I came up with this quote at the time, trying to make direction in my life, which was, think of the stories you want to tell when you're 75 and then go out and live them. And I had no idea at the time just how impactful that quote would end up becoming, because we graduated, fast forward 7 years, and it was a cold, snowy Thursday, and I get a call from my mom, and I figured it's about our ski trip that I'm going on with my parents the next day. And instead, I'll never forget, I could hear tears in her voice when she said, "Hudson, Dad died." And so my dad was my hero, and here it was literally, he was there one day, no health issues, dies in his sleep of a heart attack. And the irony is, 20 minutes later, that quote that I had, which was, think of the stories you want to tell when you're 75, then go out and live them. I'm walking out underneath that door. My dad died at 55. So 20 years of what I thought was guaranteed life, my dad never got to live. So that was kind of the inspiration for us to actually start living life, and not just kind of living to get to the next day, living to get through life, but actually being intentional. So one thing led to another. Our dream at the time was buy an old RV, travel to the 50 states. And here we are now in 180 countries.
Wow. Emily, what did this feel like to you? Were you guys married at this time? Or because he went from I'm in college to we're graduating. So now I'm tell us about that.
Sure.
What's the adventure together? And I imagine you at full of whimsy and wonder. It isn't like Sarah following Abraham around. You're let's go do this thing. So tell us about your adventure.
Yeah, I have always admired his intentionality and that quote, but I think we would have never imagined how much it would impact our lives. And I feel like so often I'm like, God, what is your plan? And I don't know how God works, but I know the two things that he tells us are to love him and to love people. And I also know that he gives us each unique dreams and passions. But so often I feel like I get caught up in my to-do list, or feeling like I'm not ready for what he's called me to do. And one story that comes to mind with that question is in Victoria Falls in Africa. It's 2 times the height of Niagara Falls, for reference. And you can do this experience where you swim literally across the falls, get to this pool where you lean over the edge of this pounding waterfall with a guide that's holding your feet.
Yeah, you must be have the subtitle "Bad Idea."
Yes. Yeah, something I would never imagine doing in my life without an expert guide. But it became one of my favorite adventures of my life. And to me, that's an example of what God calls us to do, which is to trust him as our expert guide. We might not be capable or even know exactly what he's calling us to, but if we're following the exact steps of our guide, which is to love him and to love people, I feel like we can't live in fear of that. We just trust him and be willing to lean over the edge to do the things that he's already called us to do.
Yeah. So tell me about this. I know with enough airplane tickets, you can get anywhere, but it requires a ton of a new ingenuity and creativity, and to say, oh, we could take this for bus fare and get there. So there's that one component, but then I sense there's also like a deeper purpose behind this thing that you just want to love God, love people. And you can't say like love your neighbor until you meet your neighbor. So otherwise it's just a concept. And it sounds like the two of you set out to meet your neighbors, both here and afar.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie that it kind of started out more so just selfishly of like, what's the craziest dream that we can think of to do? And that was at first, take a step and travel in an RV. But we knew that we didn't want to just do something for ourselves selfishly. We're Christians, and so we wanted to do something with intention for loving God. And we didn't know what that looked like moving into an RV. So we took about 6 months where we said, we can't plan, we just have to pray. And then we still felt like God was telling us, just go for it. We didn't know what that would look like. And there's been countless stories since then of where God has shown up when we get out of the way. And that's been so cool of exactly like you said, meeting your neighbor. And I think our perspective in the world has changed so much because of that.
Tell me about this for a guy who writes stories. Like I'm just always, I send myself about 100, 150 emails a day,
Wow.
which is crazy. Just like the little shards of ideas or thoughts or whatever. I'm like, him again, block. But you have met so many people and experienced so many things. How are you keeping track of this?
So one way that we keep track of it is we make little videos and we post them on Instagram and YouTube. And when we started out on our trip, we didn't do the best job of that. But it's been really cool to look back at some of those stories and see where we were just traveling that day, that God shows up and puts people in our lives, even some days that we're a little too tired.
Yeah, a story that comes to mind, because I think I used to see people as like so different than me, and now I just see people as we all want to be loved. Like we're all more similar than we are different. And in Namibia, there's this tribe called the Himba, which Google them at your own risk because they look very different. The women are completely topless and they cover themselves in a goat hide on the bottom. The women, they don't bathe with normal water. They cover themselves in like a red paste, their full bodies and their hair. And so we met with them and we're just amazed by their culture, how kind they were to welcome us into their homes. We were dancing together. But the next day was how God really surprised me. We were traveling 7 hours in a public bus to the capital. And there was a girl there who was part of another Himba tribe in her traditional clothes or lack thereof. And for some reason, I felt God telling me to talk to her and to ask her if she knew Jesus. I'm like, okay, God, I'll try, but no one spoke English the day before. So, at least she won't have to talk to me. Well, not only did she speak English, but when I asked her if she knew Jesus, her face lit up. She's topless, covered in this red clay, but she's just glowing and says, my grandma was the first Christian of the Himba tribe. And her entire life purpose now is to advocate for her people and like just encourage the culture, but share the love of Jesus with them. And I think so often now, because we keep in touch and she's inspired me so much of like, what would have happened if I didn't talk to her because she was different than me? And coming back to like America, it's, there's not people wearing goat's hide, but what does that look like? Maybe we're different because of politics or social status or religion. And how often do we miss those opportunities to just connect with the people right in front of us because we think they're different when God sees people as people?
I think sometimes people get head faked when they hear about something about going around the world and visiting people, because they're thinking that you're paying like market for all these tickets and all that. And I mean, it costs so much money to get not far that it must be just this over the top thing. Explain to us like the just how creative and nuanced you can be. I remember as like a young lawyer with these young kids like the size of trout, and we wanted to go meet these leaders of different countries. Then wrote to them, and then said, and then I found like the most ingenious ways because we're like broke. I remember one time we sold the pickup truck to get to Myanmar. To meet with this dictator because he invited us. I'm like, well, now we got one car. Tell us about how that is practically, because some people will be quietly dismissive in their own mind. They'll create some gap because they go, well, your life doesn't look like my life. And they make some assumptions about it. And then I think you can dispel some of those. So tell us, how does it work? Like, what's when you're being frugal? Like, how do you go, like, okay, we got to get from here to there. We're totally broke. How do we do this?
So if you look at our Instagram and stuff, it's pretty clear. We're more on the budget side of travel, not out of desire, more out of necessity. And I love what you said about selling like the truck, because there are always ingenious ways. I think number one is marry an amazing wife who knows credit card points and knows how to figure out being willing to sleep in hostels and on the floor.
I think we've slept on more airport floors than we have in hotels over like $75.
I bet.
And one of the things that we have, like a saying that we try to always remind ourselves, especially when we're couch surfing or something like that and there's bed bugs, is you can either lower your expectations or raise your budget. So we always try to think of that, of set your expectations extremely low. And for us, we don't have a family, we don't have a house for the past 8 years. It'd be nice to have a closet, but we don't have a car or anything like that. So we take all of our expenses. We've taught English online. We have jobs of content creation, and using those funds to travel and just kind of showing up and seeing what God has for us wherever he has us that day.
Yeah, I think the idea in it for some people, carving a new groove in their mind, is to, instead of thinking of your life as a business trip, to start thinking of it as an adventure. And it's not just this hedonistic bender to just say, well, I'm just going to go do whatever I want to do, wherever I want to do. But you live a life very much on purpose, showing up, but in a really unconventional way. So how do you deal with, whether it was parents or friends or total strangers to you, misunderstanding you? So go write a book or two. People misunderstand you. Like, that's just Tuesday for me. People like say the darndest thing. Oh, there was somebody, I spoke somewhere, and a woman called the next day, and she said that she had been there. And I said, oh, how'd you like the talk? This was down in Texas. And she said, oh, I hated it. I'm like, well, which part? She said, oh, the whole thing. And I said, how come? And she said, you were cussing the whole time. And I just didn't remember dropping any nasty words. I said, what did I say? And she said, you said, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm like, that was not a cuss word where I grew up. I mean, we did not go to the same high school, but evidently where she grew up, that was a cuss word. And so rather than trying to sort that out, to just understand that you'll be misunderstood along the way, and you try to be culturally sensitive. Like in the Middle East, you wouldn't be showing the bottoms of your feet to somebody, and you would rise to a room. In Uganda, you would start, the protocol would be the most important person in the room and notice them all the way down and call them out by name, and then end by saying all protocols reserved, which means like, I just tried as best I could to do all the stuff you guys do. So how do you deal with being misunderstood? Do you turtle and get your feelings hurt? Do you blow it off? Like, I'd love to hear from each of you. Hudson.
I think for us, like, we're from a smaller town, and I think one of the way that you were taught, kind of not said, but was, you work really hard so that you can retire and you can then go enjoy life. And so I think understanding, that's how I was raised, and that was my perspective of how you live life. So just like how when we're traveling, if we can understand the culture of the Himba people, then I can understand if somebody else may not agree with the way that we're traveling or the way we're living life. But I love like what you said of, sometimes you just have to take action, and then God will use you. And so my job isn't to really, I don't think everybody's always going to understand whatever you're doing, but just to love others and try to pray. And I think as long as we're pursuing God, then he can use us if we're willing. And so that's what I always try to remember when somebody says something that may be a little bit more on the rude side.
Yeah, and I think they just, I always picture people with a little thought bubble over their head,
Mm.
and those are all the things that you're thinking. And I just keep things in my thought bubble. And so sometimes when somebody says something lame, I'm like, oh, that one just snuck out
Yeah.
by mistake. And also with criticism or people don't understand, it's outside their life experience. And so
Yeah.
they just don't have a shelf for that. And so what they'll do is they'll mean to say something, but by mistake, they'll reach for the stupid shelf. And the stupid shelf always has tons of things to say. I've always tried to say to myself, how can I reach up a little higher? Like, I don't want to say that predictable thing. I want to say, like, what would actually matter more? How do you deal with being misunderstood, Emily?
I just know how God has completely changed my heart and where I used to think. So, for example, I think a lot of people will say that we're naive when we say there's so many hard things in the world, but the world is just so beautiful and there's amazing kind people that would literally give their life for a neighbor. And I feel like the more we travel, the more aware we are of the horrific things in the world. Like, we've met a man whose brother was beheaded by ISIS. You know, we're at an orphanage in Cameroon with kids who were victims of human trafficking. But despite the like horrific things, there's just countless stories of people that would give their life for their neighbor. And I've been challenged by that. We say, be the people on the bus in Romania. You want to tell that story?
That's we always try to remember that of to be Jesus to other people. We were backpacking through Europe for 3 months. So we were taking trains and buses and we thought we were experts. But this time when we're in Bucharest, we get on, we pay for the bus, and security comes up to us and they're telling us that we owe a fine because we didn't pay for the bus. Well, we don't speak Romanian, so people in the back of the bus started overhearing our conversation. And I won't forget that strangers started standing up and they were yelling at security. We didn't know what they were saying. And Bob, I won't forget that there were 3 people who reached into their wallet. They pulled out money and it was like a movie. They were handing it up to the security. We didn't know what was going on. And a guy who spoke English, he goes, we decided that you either had to go to the police station to get this sorted out, or we could pay for your fine. And we want, when you think of Romania, to remember the kindness of the people here. And that's our motivation. When people hear Jesus, we want them to think of the kindness of Christians. Not all the negative, not all this world is terrible, and there are tons of terrible things, but just to be the people on the bus when they see Jesus, that they see our love and our kindness for them.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between going as the professor and going as the student. One is the perception of some professors would be they're there, have everybody sit in rows and listen very politely to what you have to say and what you think you need to teach. And the other is to be the student, to say, man, I'm just here to take notes and take action. And so Stephanie and I were talking about just before we got started, I've been flown airplanes to get to where I live in Canada. You need a float plane that lands on the water. So I decided to learn how to fly one. And the thing about airplanes, you need to talk to the control tower, and they always talk so fast. I never know what they're saying. So I always say, even 17 years in, I say, I'm a student pilot. And as soon as you just say you're a student, everybody's nice to you. And so too, I bet as you go to say, I'm just came to learn. I just came here to learn, but not just to take notes, but to take action and just saying, find small things. I think of that Paul's letter to the Galatians. He said, the only thing that matters is faith expressed in love. And so it would be the Romanian bus, people expressing their faith and love. And I just don't want to vet everybody and say, what do you think? And do you agree with me? And all that. I'm just like going as a visitor. So you're constantly the sojourners. That gets a lot of airtime in the Old Testament about providing comfort to sojourners. How do you think you've changed and evolved over these different, how many years have you been out now?
8 years now.
So 8 years. How do you think you've evolved individually and as a couple in 8 years on the road?
I think I used to think that just people were so different, or that some people were like beyond being loved. But now I just have such a clear picture of God's love for literally everyone. An example of that, if you want to tell the story about Afghanistan, people were just so kind and welcoming to us.
Yeah, you're saying about hospitality. I think through Central Asia and the Middle East, the hospitality is unmatched. Time and time again, I can't count how many times we're invited to people's homes. They set out food, they set out tea, and you're saying, how are we changed? That's definitely challenged us, because a lot of times I'm kind of in my own zone, or on a plane, I'm like, headphones in, don't talk to the person beside me. But we've experienced so much kindness, and we've realized that God loves everyone. So the story she was talking about is there were random strangers in Afghanistan, invited us to their homes. It was
in Kabul?
Yes.
Okay.
It was an incredible experience. She was up with the women in the upper rooms, and I was down with the uncles and the grandfather. And then it just so happened that when we left, it got dark. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the Taliban stopped us, and they held us for 2 hours. And they were questioning us. And before we knew it, there were 30 armed people surrounded us, got more intense than what we preferred. And they decided that they were going to take us to another location for questioning. And on the way there, a huge answer to prayer happened, that there's 2 Taliban members driving our car. Their guns are leaning towards us. And so we're there just kind of leaning, just in case anything bumps or goes off, just kind of leaning to the side. And the answer to prayer is, while we're driving, we happen to cross paths with the upper level person who we were going to be questioned by. Pulled on the side of the road, shook our hands, and let us go. But it's just a reminder to us that God calls us, like even the people who we see completely different, or with incredible, difficult things and evil that people are experiencing. God doesn't call us to love some people. God calls us to love everyone and to pray for everyone. And so how much more so can we do that for our neighbors here in the U.S. or in everyday life?
Yeah, some stories that you'll live and experience, and for people listening, they're lived stories, but they're not for everybody. They're just for part of their family and their own legacy. Then there's other stories that are worth sharing. Have you been taking notes as you've been going along? I've like that bias towards taking notes to say, it's a great story. A tip in writing stories, I always use one, me, my, or I, and all the rest is we, us, and our. Just a great way to, instead of making the story about you, to make it about what you've learned and how that, as you zoom out, this is the common problem we all have. We all need love, purpose, acceptance, a couple authentic relationships, but to talk about our need rather than my need. So how is it that you guys are keeping track? Don't trust your memory. It's like a bad best friend. It won't be there when you need them.
My favorite way is through taking videos. And one experience I never imagined I would do in my life is in South Sudan. We showered in cow urine.
As one does.
As one does.
When in Rome.
We were with the Mandari tribe. They're nicknamed the cow tribe because they have thousands of cows. So you can just imagine what it smells like. And because they don't have a water source nearby, when a cow starts peeing, it's literally direct from the source. You just run over, duck under it, and start washing your hair.
Okay.
And so I will never forget that. Thankfully, we have the video to also never forget it by. But it was warm. I tried to convince myself it was refreshing and still until it got into my eyes and my mouth.
You're like, yeah, that's just nasty.
Whatever you picture cow pee to taste like, that's exactly what it tastes like.
A lot like grasshoppers, but
Yeah.
you guys, you'll have all these rich experiences to pass along. And so for a person listening to this, might be living in Cleveland and they're not going to go across an ocean, but they have an opportunity to go across the strait and love their neighbor. And so I think that's the takeaway that I have.
Yeah.
Whether this one, as you go to your last 10% of all the countries, you got to tell us what's on the list. Which are the ones?
We're really excited because we mainly have 11 of the ones left are Pacific Islands. So we're going to be going to warm weather, small islands, and we're really looking forward to that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm trying to think of Atria. Oh, there's an island nation and it's 1 mile across.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of that. It's just this really remote.
Yes.
I actually wrote to the guy. Well, I wrote, meaning Stephanie probably wrote to the guy on my behalf to say, hey, can we just walk across your country together?
That's amazing.
But I would just love with anticipation that you guys would finish this and then you'd walk away not only changed, but there'd be more to pass on. And you're continuing to do that with your videos. But I think you'll be deeply moved and changed. And as your faith, like you should learn more about that, as your relationship, because there's got to be times that are just really rugged to just say, like, this is just like kind of stressful to be always on the move. And then as you're misunderstood along the way, so that'll happen too. And people are just all like insecure. We all are.
Yeah.
We just deal with it differently. Some people better than others. So we just hope that this is just a great into the next leg of this adventure together. And I personally am expecting many, many words from you in writing. It's not as much a video guy as a like write it down guy. I'm just speaking on behalf of everyone who loves you and everyone who follow for generations. They just want to see your words. So I can barely spell cat. That didn't slow me down for a minute. But you guys, you've been listening to the Dream Big podcast. Hope this was super helpful to you. For this reason, I hope you have a dream or an ambition, something you've been deferring, and deferral is not your friend. Deferral is just the excuse you came up with not to get out and do some of these things. If it's wisdom, that's great. Be all ears to that. But if you're just delaying because you go like, well, that's for somebody else, but not for me, then maybe follow Hudson and Emily as they're on this terrific adventure. How do we find you guys?
On Instagram, all social medias, we're just Hudson, the word, and Emily.
Yes. And a book soon to come out. And we'll let you know the title later. It's maybe I wrote a book. Subtitled because Bob made me.
Thanks, Bob.
All
That's
right,
a
you
huge
guys.
honor
Thanks a
coming
million
from
for
you.
having
Thank you
the
so
time
much.
here. And I feel like I'm slowing you down from some country that you're just supposed to be at. I don't even know what I'm doing for lunch, and you've got your eyes on a Pacific. Like, what's the next stop for you?
Yes, so we'll be taking some island hoppers and then also headed to China, which we're really excited to visit.
Wow. Well, say hi to everybody there for me.
Thank you. Thanks
All
so
right.
much for having us.
You bet.